Thank you so much, Christy, and everybody. Welcome and welcome, Dr. Britta Bushnell. I am so honored and so excited to be sitting down and having this conversation with you. To introduce Dr. Britta to everybody who's joining now or later, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about her because it is so impressive and you'll understand why I'm so excited. So Dr. Britta Bushnell is a wife, mother, and author of Transformed by Birth. She is a veteran childbirth educator, a celebrated speaker, mythologist, and specialist in childbirth, relationships, and parenting. For over 20 years, she has worked with individuals and couples as they prepare for the life-changing experience of giving birth. Her work with parents has been enriched by her doctoral work in mythology and psychology, her years spent as the co-owner of Birthing from Within, as well as her dedicated study of solution-focused birth therapy, storytelling, and sustaining sexual and romantic vibrancy, even during parenthood. Britta was awarded Educator of the Year by the Southern California Doula Association, and her work focuses on the transformational journey of pregnancy, birth, and new parenthood. Using grounded, honest, and a playful approach, she helps parents navigate birth and parenthood with strength, confidence, and a deep connection as a couple. So Dr. Britta, thank you so much for your work in the world and for joining us.
Oh, Lauren, it's a profound pleasure to be here with you and with your community. And it's always so kind of interesting to hear my own bio read back to me because it's like, okay. But it's super fun to be here. And let's have some fun. Two of my favorite things are having fun and going deep.
Yes, and it's so wonderful when we can combine those. I think so often we hear deep and we think serious. So
I was a birthday party clown in college, so I know how to go both ways.
And I was just saying to one of my teachers, the importance of humor. I was recently talking about my daughter and passing on, not wanting to pass on certain things, and the realization that you're going to no matter what, and how important it is to have a sense of humor around the whole journey of birth and parenthood and even relationships. So
Oh,
definitely
definitely.
bringing the playfulness.
Yes.
Well, and I was so lucky, just to give people context, to be a part of your childbirthing classes in person just before the release of your book, Transformed by Birth. And one of the things that's been so, I think, astonishingly profound to me now, 3 years into motherhood, is looking around and seeing who can I model after? Who are the heroes? What are the stories? And so many of the stories that are held up in our culture and even other cultures are lone wolf men. That there aren't these celebrated women who have entered into motherhood and parenthood who are people that, we can look up to, but finding that role in primary parenthood. And one of the things that's so profound about what you offer in the book and your courses and the way that you present is through this lens of mythology and taking the birthing parent, which again, is not a gendered topics that we want to acknowledge, that is not a gendered area, but taking us on that journey. And so maybe sharing a little bit about your approach from this mythological perspective that I think is so unique. I haven't seen it anywhere else.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I would say that kind of my approach goes in a couple of ways, and things that you just touched on are there. I really love to focus on the relationship, that so many stories that we see are lone wolf hero stories. And I think there's elements of the birth journey that are very personal and lone wolf-y about them. That there is also an energy in the overculture, which is a term I use to describe the energy of the should, that pressure that pushes down on us, regardless of what microculture we live within, because there isn't just one culture. And especially in Western culture, there's a should that presses down, that idealizes independence, that is like, if you could do it by yourself, you should. And that messaging comes through some of those myths that you're alluding to in there. And so I like to really bring in the relational aspects of birth, but also not just because what I do is, or what one element of what I do is preparation for birth, but because birth in the scheme of parenthood is pretty fleeting. That doesn't mean it isn't important. It is important. And even if it's a 72-hour or longer labor journey, it's still in the span of parenthood pretty quick, as you know already. And I mean, my children are 23 and 20. So I'm at another part of the parenting journey. And while my birth journey feels so, both of my birth journeys feel precious and sacred and unique to me, I also see what I learned in those journeys and what I experienced with my husband through those journeys as as beginnings, as messages, as teachers for who I have needed to be to mother and parent my children throughout these more than 2 decades now of being a parent. And so I look both, I do actually use mythology and stories in how I talk about birth and what I do with regard to birth. And I'm looking at also the cultural myths, or what I sometimes refer to as the cultural myths, which are those messages that press down on us from the overculture, that are the shoulds, the ideals that work against us, and that coming into awareness of them through the journey of preparation for birth and into new parenthood are powerful for the practice of parenthood moving onward. So the idealization of independence is one of them. The ideal of control and certainty as a big one. That's the first one I address, because in many ways, it's the one that stacks up all the others.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there's no one listening who can relate to wanting control and certainty right now.
Right. And it makes sense. I want to make sure I'm not saying that the illusion of control and certainty is something bad. It's part of a truth that we have within us, that we want control and certainty. It gives us a sense of safety. It helps us. And part of what makes that super tricky is that it is an illusion.
And so this is so much of the practice, right? I mean, this is what we're practicing for. When we talk about yoga, when we talk about meditation, this is what, when we're talking about the removal of avidya, right? So ignorance, we want to see clearly. And what we want to see clearly are these moments of perceived control, which really we can then understand is its own Maya or its own illusion. And I think, for anybody tuning in who is pregnant or who has gone through initiating the mother, to say that this is why Britta's work resonated so deeply with myself and Travis. Part of Holistic Yoga Flow is that we interweave story into all of our classes. We're interweaving mythology and quotes and poems and different aspects of storytelling from the iteration of when we began teaching. And storytelling is how we connect. It's how we connect journeys. And I knew when I was pregnant with Willa, I needed to take a birthing class because I needed to understand what was going to happen to my body and what were the potential outcomes, and to have strategies in place to know how to be better supported in the inevitable case of uncertainty arising, in case the birth plan did not go according to plan, which is true for everybody. You know, something's going to go awry, maybe in a great way or maybe in an unexpected way. And I knew I wanted that, but I knew I didn't want just a solely medicalized approach to birth. And for anybody who has birthing friends in their sphere, or you yourself are thinking about birthing, this is what I know Britta brings through Transformed by Birth and her courses, in that it's going to take you on that journey on a much deeper level. And I have so appreciated that about your work, because it ties in so clearly with what we do and the journeys that we've seen the stories take people on. And simultaneously, you know, what you talk about with the overculture, and this is so much of what we say, is like, we're holding both, right? We're holding both, that it's
100%.
beautiful and it's painful, that it's messy and it's gorgeous, that we're going to grieve who we used to be and we're going to love this new baby in our lives. And it's that holding both, that paradox that can be so tricky.
Which I don't know if you can see behind me, but I have an ampersand right here, an and sign, and it's very intentionally, sometimes I sit so that you can see it, but that is an intentional thing, because that multiplicity, the idea that rather than being in a binary where it is either or, it's one or the other. You are either happy with what is happening or you are sad with what is happening. You can actually be happy and sad and stressed and confused and so many more things at the same time. There is an and involved here. There's so many possibilities. And that's one of the reasons why I use mythology in my classes and in my work, both with folks in pregnancy as well as in couples support, is that when we're looking at our lives through story, we are actually often able to see ourselves in that in a way that isn't this or that. It allows us to feel the complexities and get curious about what's happening and what's going on and what might be helpful, without it feeling like if we hear somebody tell a birth story, for example, we often hear it as their birth story, their journey, what happened for them, what's going on. Sometimes similarly with parenthood or relationship, it is their story, it's their journey, it's what is happening for them. But when we use mythology and metaphor, we're able to see ourselves within it, rather than have it be other. Like, oh, that's what happened to them. I like to use story because we can see ourselves in it. And even fairy tales, like when fairy tales told to young children are often about how do we learn to address the dragons in our lives? Not literal dragons, but we all have non-literal dragons that show up in our existence. That what might we need to know or do to move forward in the face of that which we did not expect? And birth is just one. I mean, sometimes birth goes absolutely exactly as people want it to go. Oh, is that my hope for people? 100%. And I will guarantee that there is nobody who gets out of birth, postpartum, and parenthood with everything going exactly as they'd like it to go.
So everybody who's listening now or later, you're not alone. You are not alone. And I recently heard somebody saying that there's new research or, studies that are saying that postpartum actually is a 7-year process, which I thought was so interesting, that to recover ourselves. And I don't know that we ever, we're totally new by that point in time. I mean, 7 years is a whole recycling of the bodily tissues, and, you're automatically a new person in 7 years. But I thought it was so interesting that it's a 7-year journey. And you're so right. I remember being in class and being pregnant with Willa, and I was creating this 40-week prenatal program, and birth was the most important thing in my life. It was my ultra marathon. It was the thing that I was preparing for. And then she came early, and she came in 5 hours, and it was done. And I was stunned because I was ready for, like, I'm ready to go 42 weeks. I'm ready to go 72 hours. I was really preparing myself. And it would have never occurred to me in the depths of it, in this pregnant, changing, miraculous body, that it was going to be so fleeting. And so heading into then these next phases, because you and your husband are both longtime yogis, which hasn't been mentioned yet. And I've had the great pleasure of practicing with Brent over the years and holding space with you. And we're at the original Yoga Works, and your
And that's
journey
where
is so
my husband and
powerful.
I met.
You're
So,
just so amazing, right? Like Travis and I met at yoga, and you guys are yogis. And so how then does this thing that comes into your life that has been created out of love, it kind of blows it up a bit and becomes this incredible practice opportunity once the birthing phase has passed?
oh, 100%. I mean, first of all, I just want to address the piece that you talked about around the postpartum experience and say that I think the journey out of the labyrinth of birth, I use the labyrinth in my work, thanks to one of my teachers, Pam England, who taught me about the labyrinth as a metaphor for the birth and postpartum journey. And the journey out of the labyrinth isn't time-based. So for some people, it might be 7 years. For others, it might be 20. And for others, it might be, I mean, I think on the short end is a year, like a really short end is a year. My definition for how long it takes to get out of the postpartum labyrinth has to do with how long it takes for you to integrate the new identity of being a parent with who you know yourself to be as an individual. So it's a process of reweaving. You spoke about, getting back. There's no going back. That's not how the world works, right? It's like we don't go backwards. We go, if we're lucky, we go forwards. We get to keep living, we get to keep growing. And so as we move forward in our journey after having a baby, it's a lot about how do we bring together who we know ourselves to be with who we are now. And that's a process that keeps going on over and over and over again. And the integration of the identity as a parent is a pretty big bedrock shaking experience. And so when the earth shakes that way, there is a period of time where the grounding happens, where we start to go, oh, I know who I am as a mom, as a dad, as a parent.
Mhm.
And I remember who I was as an individual, as a professional, as a friend, as a daughter, as a whoever it is that are the various different parts of ourselves. And this is part of what I think the weaving of yoga, the weaving of the idea of practice is so incredibly important. Because that element of coming to the mat each and every day that you do come to the mat, that idea, or to the cushion. The idea of practice is not, oh, I'm just going to do this when it feels good. That's not how that works, right? It's like the concept of practice. I can remember sitting, coming to my yoga mat, especially when I had a 6:30 a.m. Monday through Friday and 8 a.m. on Sunday practice. That when I was doing that every single day, that was preparation for my journey as a parent. I didn't know it at the time.
Hmm.
but it was, because there were days when I would show up on my mat and I'd feel open and strong and like ready to take it all on. Same with parenthood, same with relationship. And then there were days when all I could do was bring myself to the mat. And that was the practice. Stepping on the mat, maybe in a puddle of tears, maybe with just enough energy to take my arms up over my head and do something that sort of looked like Surya Namaskara A, and then end up in Shavasana. And that is true too of parenthood and relationship. That when we have the understanding that it doesn't always have to feel good, that it doesn't always have to be remarkable, it actually brings us into a space of relationship to ourselves in parenthood, to our partner in relationship, that gets us through some of the really hard points.
I so just want to pause and value everything that you're saying. This is a place that I find really tricky in terms of not just my own practice, but I think in the contemporary framing of the practice, what we see, I think, in contemporary spirituality. And there's a misinterpretation that if it's hard, my practice isn't working. If it's not going well, then there's something wrong with me, right? And this, how quick we are to say, oh, I need to fix something with myself, or I'm not working hard enough, or I'm doing something wrong because this is hard, or because my child is having a hard day. It must be something that I'm doing. And for there to be this collective reminder that actually, when it's hard, I just heard Jack Cornfield say this, when it's hard and you're on retreat, that's the insight. That's the moment of deep practice. And I just really appreciate that reminder. And what you're saying inside of that is the reminder that wherever we are in our journey, whether it's pregnancy or parenthood, and whatever part of parenthood or relationship we're on, we're going to have enough energy to do what is essential that day.
Right.
And to really trust that resource inside of us, that whatever is most essential in that day, we will have the resources to get it done, even if it's not my shiniest version of that or my most equanimous version of myself.
Right. And there's also the piece that also comes from the yoga practice to being able to pay attention to the difference between discomfort and pain that has direction and purpose involved in it. I mean, I can remember, especially when I was really deep in my yoga practice, that there were times when I was like, oh my God, this hurts, or this is hard, but it didn't feel dangerous. It didn't feel damaging. And there's a similar bringing of awareness to life in parenthood and relationship as well, to be able to navigate and tell that space and difference between, is this a spot where our relationship is stretching and it's kind of painful, or is this damaging to me, to my tissue? And is it time to stop? And those things are the discernment through practice is incredibly important as well.
And I'm so curious, in your work with couples specifically, to speak to some of this, because I think it can be confusing. You often hear that people get divorced or they leave each other and end the relationship within about the first 3 years of parenting, which are some of the toughest and the trickiest. And that there can be some not so clear seeing, a lack of discernment around, this is an opportunity to stretch things and to go a little bit deeper and to become new versions of ourselves, versus when this is something that needs to be moved away from. So I'm just curious, what are some of the common things that you see coming up with couples that are entering into this new iteration of life?
I mean, there's a lot. Because it is a big time of transition. And it's a time of transition, not just for each of the individuals who make up the couple or make up the relationship. It is also a time of change for the relationship itself. And I often refer to, there's me, there's my husband, and there's the relationship between us. And each of those has wants. And when a baby comes into the family, then there is also this other entity called the family. And the child or children also have their needs and their wants and their preferences. And so now there's all these different things paying attention, and it can be easy to get tunnel visioned on what it is the other person needs, or what it is I want and need, or what our child or children need, and to sideline, what does the relationship need? What does the family need? And it works great when my needs and my husband's needs and our relationship needs all line up together. Oh, I love that. Or when our children and our needs and our family's needs all line up together. That feels like flow. But it doesn't always happen that way. And we can easily get into the place where we, especially in early parenthood, where we are sidelining some of those elements. And the relationship doesn't have words that say, hey, I have needs, right? The family doesn't have, I have needs. They don't have ways of saying those things, but they certainly have ways of communicating them. So when the relationship is asking for something, asking for attention, it often shows up in conflict or abrasion within the relationship between the two individuals in it. Let me give you an example. So in early parenthood, I'll give an example from my own life. In early parenthood, I would get to a point at the end of the day where get the kids to bed, and I'd be like, oh, whew, finally, I'm getting some time for myself. This is great. And so I would do what I needed to do to take care of myself. My husband was also, we'd do the bedtime routine very often together, but he would also get to the end of the day very tired. He was starting a new business, things were happening. So we'd get the kids to bed, and he'd go, whew, okay, great. Now I'm going to do what I need to do. Each of our needs, each of us was having our needs met, but the relationship was not. The relationship was not getting its needs met. And so there became some like the ability to be snappy with each other was one of the ways that the relationship spoke about its needs. Or feeling distant from each other was another way. Or the comparative trap, which can be a really tricky one. Do you know what my day was like? Well, do you know what my day was like? Which was really just each of us needing to be seen and acknowledged. And if we weren't feeling seen and acknowledged within the relationship, that would get cranky.
And what are some of the ways that you found that people can help get themselves into inquiry around this? I don't want to say fix it or solve it, because again, we're in relationship to it. So when people are noticing some of this rub coming up, and I'm sure anybody who's been on this journey resonates with at least an aspect of what you shared, what are some of the strategies that we can throw in to shake things up again and bring back connection, bring back the yoga, right? The yoga
Right.
that brought us together in the first place.
Right. Well, one of the things that I think is important is to expand our capacity for discomfort. And that sounds so unsexy, and I know that. It's like, wait, what, Britta? You're telling me I actually have to put up with this? No, but I'm saying that in relationship, is especially in newer relationship that then brings a baby into it, it can be really like, wait, where's the super joyful feelings that I was feeling about my lover? That now it's like we're not even connecting. We're in a relationship situation where the center of our relationship is our child, which is not super connective. I mean, it can be really beautiful early on, but it isn't necessarily that sustainable for the relationship tie to be entirely based on the shared love and connection of the baby, because that there's not as much connective tissue between the individuals. And so in that postpartum period, like when I do pain coping practices in my childbirth classes, it is not just about contractions. It's about expanding our capacity to navigate the discomfort and for our partner to understand what helps us navigate that discomfort. So, number one, I would say, is what helps you become big enough to contain some of that discomfort. Again, not a super sexy piece, but I do think it's important. And then I would say to pay attention to what works for you. What helps bring your relationship back into connection? Now, for some people, that's prioritizing date night. And I want to be clear that when I say date night, I'm not saying get a sitter, go out to a fancy thing, go to a movie. Date night might be, okay, we put our child or children to bed, and then we sit together. And we have a meal together or a fancy beverage, and we spend time together. That might be what works for some. For others, it can be really helpful to pay attention and establish coming and going rituals, rituals of connection and reconnection. So this might be, how do you say goodbye and split into the paths that you go in your day? And often more important is, how do you come back together? What do you do that brings you into relationship with one another as a couple? I worked with a couple for whom in this couple, it was a heterosexual couple, and the father went to work and had a very physical job, and the mother, the woman in this case, was at home with their child. And when they would come back together, they were having some conflict because she was ready to just be like, here's the baby, I need a break. And he was like, oh my God, I'm sweaty and I've been around so many people all day and I am not ready to reconnect with anybody. And so they were finding that they would come together and it would be abrasive in the coming together. And so we work to develop new coming back together strategies, new rituals where he would go and not even say hello to the baby or to his wife, and he'd go take a shower. And in taking that shower, he would take some time to himself to clean, to ground. Then he would come back out and he would take the baby and she would go and take some private time. After she had her, I think it was like 15 minutes of private time. So right now each one had about 15 minutes, this is not big. It's
Yeah.
just like 15 minutes. Then they would come back together.
Mm-hmm.
And when they would come together, they would acknowledge each other. They would hug, they would kiss, they would take a moment to reconnect as lovers, as a couple, not just as co-parents.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things that tends to happen is even in the handoff, right? That can just be like, oh, roommate, co-parent. And that's different energy. Those are important energies, but they are different energies than often what the relationship itself is asking for.
Oh, there's so many things in here that are so powerful to touch on. One of which, just touching on the simplicity of it, right? It doesn't have to be a lot. It doesn't have to be hours upon hours. That making these small ritual changes that can be done in manageable bite-sized increments do make a difference. And something that I've had a couple of different conversations, someone who wrote a book on parenting recently and is a mother of two, other people in the community, even just now in the Q&A, that there are so many women who I hear, and I'm going to use just this as the primary parents, who say at the end of the day, I just want to be alone. And then this challenge around, I'm really feeling like this is what I'm needing. And how do I meet this need without violating this boundary or feeling like I'm not honoring the need that I have? And I recently had heard an interview with Michelle Obama where she was talking about compromise as part of marriage. And I think that this goes into that stretching into discomfort. And not to say that we don't need time. Of course, we all need time. I need time alone. I feel that way at the end of my day too. But just like you're saying, Travis and I sit, for 10 or 15 minutes. Once Willa is asleep, we sit and we connect. And I know that there are moments in that reconnection when I'm like, is it over yet? Because I'm ready to read my book. I'm ready to be quiet. And I'm feeling myself with that restlessness. I'm feeling myself glance at the clock and realizing that I'm disconnecting and having to come back. And I'm not always successful at it. There are times where I cut it off. But I know that discomfort, or I know that restlessness because of my sitting practice, because it's the same thing that I've had to sit through on a meditation retreat or in a yoga practice. But I think it's interesting that I've had several conversations with people that bump up against wanting to be with that discomfort. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think this is exactly where practice and parenthood and practice and relationship go hand in hand, that relationship can be practice. Parenthood can be practice. I'm not saying that it always is, but when we have a perspective of parenthood as practice or relationship as practice, there is a place of, oh, ooh, okay, this is a stretch, or this fidgets are familiar, whatever that is, and that sometimes the smallest adjustment can make the biggest change. That when we lift up on our quadriceps, that it can give a very different energy in our Trikonasana. there's just it's micro movements, and that can make a big difference. And
And I
that's
hear
true
you,
in, yeah.
and speaking to what I hear in this also is some radical responsibility, right? That I feel a responsibility to then look and see what are the ways that in these rituals of coming and going, as an example, if I'm having a tough day, am I punishing by withholding the kiss before we go? And I think constantly looking at these ways that they're small. I'm hesitant to use this word, but I think it's what it is, like small microaggressions that are getting inserted into the relationship because of the mind of comparison, or this belief that there's not enough time, or I have more to do than you have to do, or whatever the burden is that's being carried. And for us to really, as a collective, be looking at, when am I creating disconnection through the choices that I'm making, versus what is the small shift that I can make that might stretch me a little bit, but reinitiates the connection in the relationship.
Yeah. And to know that those microaggressions or bigger aggressions to others or to ourselves are indications of need. They are a voice that is trying to be heard. And so how do we hear that voice and tend to it? It's asking for something. What is it asking for?
Mm-hmm.
What does it
Mm-hmm.
need?
Yeah, and this is something I've seen so many women express, primary parents express coming into parenthood around, oh, I don't even know how to name my needs. That these things are coming up, or these microaggressions are coming up, or bigger explosions and moments of reactivity. And then when you turn and ask, well, what is the need that's here? It's like, wow, I've spent so much of my life ignoring my needs that now here I am in the depths of parenthood and I can't even name what I need. And so there it is, that integration of having to maybe go back to those younger parts of ourselves and where were those needs not met decades ago, and getting to reparent ourselves as part of this journey.
Yes, and also communicating with our partner what are those needs that might not be getting met. And I'll say, as somebody who was primary parent, although I'm using the term lead parent more and more because I like the idea that you can, so often now, both parents work outside the home. So there isn't a primary parent in a 1950s kind of way. It's more like, I'm going to pass the leading of the parenthood to you, and then you pass it back to me, and who's leading it, rather than like I'm holding that spot. Although there are certainly some places where primary parenthood still exists, in some relationships and things. And as a primary parent, that place of pausing and checking in with what are my needs is really important. Because as you said, having that be lost, losing the connection to what are my needs, what are my wants, can be tricky. I mean, as simple as, so what do you want to do this weekend? Comes out of my mouth way more often than what I want to do this weekend is.
Right.
It's like, wait a minute, where'd that go? And so making that part of the practice of checking in, what do I want? What is it that matters to me? And maintaining connection to that through parenthood is an additional practice.
Mm.
One of the things that I've found that is really helpful for that is to set aside time to sit in deep conversation with one's partner. Because I've noticed, both in my own relationship and in many of the relationships that I have worked with and mentored, is the swallowing of little things that bother us. It's like, oh, I won't worry about that. That's not such a big thing. Oh, I won't worry about that. That's not such a big thing. And then it grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. And staying current is incredibly important. Staying current with our beloved in a way that allows us to know where one is at and to be able to understand capacity. Where is your capacity? Okay, my capacity on a scale of 1 to 100 is at a 15. Okay, your capacity is at a 25. You've got just a little more in the tank than I do. So I'm going to let you handle bedtime. But being able to have more current conversations and to give space and time to unpack what it is that are our needs and wants. Because it often can take a few extra beats, especially for somebody who has been enculturated as female, to identify what it is that they want and need. Mm-hmm. Because we've been taught pleasing behaviors and accommodating behaviors that can make it more challenging to identify that. And so it's like to give an extra beat, an extra few moments to say, hang on, let me think about that. Let me pause and breathe and stretch and really ask the question of myself, how was my day? I mean, I can remember so many times when my husband would come home and I would ask him, what happened? What was your day like? Tell me more. And I'd ask lots of questions and dive into it. And then he'd say, how was yours? And I'd say, it was good. Really? That was the full and complete conversation. Unless, he would say, well, tell me more. What'd you do? What happened? And because it was just like, oh, it was just almost too much effort.
Yeah. Yeah.
To dive into it more. And yet the practice of diving into it more itself actually re-energizes.
Yeah. And allowing ourselves the space to communicate in this way is that reconnection and is, for everybody knows that the word yoga means union. And this is how we come together again. And it's how we relate to our friends. So we need to have that relation back in with our intimate partner. There's so many directions we could go with this. I can't believe how much time has already passed because I feel like we've barely even scratched the surface of what it is you offer and your insights. But I do want to leave space for people who have joined us live today. If you have any questions, to be able to either pop in the chat or raise your hand and come on and ask any questions if there are any questions today. So for those of you who are here with us, if you have any questions around these topics or for Dr. Britta, please let us know because we would love to include your voices in this conversation and your lines of inquiry.
So I see one question. I'm going to read this one out loud. So she says, I feel that at the end of the day, I always just want alone time. Usually I go right to bed when the kids are asleep. But my husband is always telling me he needs to spend more time together with me. How am I supposed to balance that? Because I know it's necessary and important for a relationship.
Yes. Oh, I feel this one. I know this one. I lived this one. And it is balance. First of all, I want to explain that my understanding of balance is not the same as other people's idea of balance. A lot of times balance is looking for the seesaw to be in the middle. But life doesn't tend to work like that. And the seesaw, the balance of the seesaw often is this. it's not balance like this. We're not trying to get things on the scale exactly equal at all times. How might we feel that the balance of the flow feels like it's nourishing and opening for us? So there's a couple of things. So when I hear your question, it reminds me of that place of each person trying to get their needs met. And that's the individual approach. And those matter. I want to really make sure that the individual needs matter. And if those individual needs are working for the relationship, then fabulous. And your needs for solitude and your husband's needs for connection, each are valid. And what does the relationship need? And what works for you to be able to have that time where being with your husband actually is nourishing and valuable for you? Are there different things that need to be discussed or explored to be able to get your need for solitude met and your husband's need for connection met, and whatever it is that your relationship is asking for, which might be a little bit of each of those or something different, and tuning in with that and checking in with that? It might be that needing solitude is coming from a place of, I can't give anybody else anything more. My well is tapped. And your husband might be in a place of, wow, I really want connection with you. I want to tell you about my day. I want to ask more of you, which can then make it feel like that time together is like, oh, more need. And checking in, okay, well, what actually, is there a way where we could spend time together where your need that is being met by solitude can be met through connection with your partner, and where your partner's desire for connection is actually filling it's meeting a different need that could be met in a different way as well. I think about these, that need for that desire for togetherness and the desire for solitude are often strategies to meet other needs. And unpacking and diving into that more fully can be a helpful tool to identify how different strategies to meet those needs in a way that supports. Hope that's a little bit helpful.
It's so beautiful. I mean, that was reframed to me a while ago of like, could this be nourishing? You know, rather than perceiving that time as taking away and like 10 more minutes that aren't mine, was like, oh, what if I could accept this time of connection as receiving it and as being nourishing? And it was sort of just a reframing semantically, but it was really powerful, you know, to allow myself, instead of having the walls of invulnerability and I have to protect this time, it's like, no, actually, if I soften this, I had to stretch into that discomfort, but then it was allowing me to receive nourishment. And that was so beautiful. So thank you for that, because I think that phrasing I know was helpful to me. So I hope it's helpful to others. I know we just have a minute or two left. Is there one more question from anybody who's here that would like to share?
Can I do a tag on real fast to what you just said? And then I know we're running low on time, but One of the things that I find often for people who have been enculturated in a female body as girls, um, is that solitude is a way for us to check in with what it is that we want and need without considering other people. And so sometimes the desire for solitude is coming from that place of, I don't want to have to consider your needs. I want to just be able to feel into what mine are. And is there a way, like with my husband, one of the things we do, I crave solitude. And I know that solitude is about being able to lean more fully into whatever it is I want or need. And so, and my husband craves time with me. And so we practice the art of how do we be together where I'm authentic with myself 100%. I would love you to be with me, babe. I want to watch this rom-com. Would you like to join me in that? We can sit on the couch together and I can meet my need for solitude, which is really about meeting my need to listen deeply to what I need, while having you join. And I don't know if that resonates, but that
yeah, that invitation is beautiful.
So you know what, we have one more, it's kind of more of a comment, but Dr. Britta Bushnell, feel free to elaborate after. So one person's asking, I have a 1.5-year-old baby boy, and since some months, the relationship with my partner is completely unbalanced. There is love, there is sharing, mainly driven by the kid, but there is also distance, and I struggle to speak up, to shout out my needs, and possibly it's the same for him. I'm struggling to understand what I really need as a woman, as an individual, as a professional, as a mother, as a partner. It's really exhausting, and the feeling is being in the middle of an ocean. That was the comment.
Thank you so much for that. I would first, I want to thank you for this comment and share that it's something that I hear. It's common, and that feeling. There's a couple of things. I do think that relationship and parenthood is an ocean. I love that you said that it sometimes feels like being in the middle of an ocean. It is an ocean, and sometimes the waves are pretty mellow, and sometimes the waves are huge. And it comes to, what kind of boat are you in? And how do you build a strong enough boat to weather the changing conditions of the ocean? And that can be both for yourself and for your relationship. It makes sense to me that you have like an 18-month-old, a 1.5-year-old, and now kind of coming out of that space that is all about the baby. It's a really common time period. Not going to time zones here, but that's what popped out of my mouth. So a time frame in that 18-month phase where so many needs are just completely ignored to the point where you can't even acknowledge them or identify them for yourself. And yet now there's a little bit of light, there's a little bit of spaciousness that happens once you're out of that real baby phase. But it's also more than just being out of the baby phase. It's such a huge amount of transition has happened for both you and your husband in your identities. So yes, there's this baby that is now 18 months old, but there are also these two individuals who are now year and a half old parents. And that's a big threshold place for a lot of folks who then wake up and look around and go, what the hell's going on here? Where did I go? Where did we go? What's happening here? So I want to first just take a moment to acknowledge the wisdom that you've shared in this comment, that you have shared and acknowledged in yourself an awareness and awakening of what's happening. That awareness matters and is a profound first step. To start there is beautiful. And now comes the place of, and now what? To be able to come in and say, what I'm hearing in what you wrote here, is that your needs matter to you. That understanding and identifying them matters to you. That who you are as an individual matters to you, as a professional, as a partner, as a mother. These things matter to you. And those are arrows pointing you in the direction of what's next. This matters to me. Okay. Then ask, okay, what helps me? What helps me know that this matters? What helps me feel the importance of these things in my life? That finding some form of balance and connection matters. So start paying attention to even the smallest things that help you in each of those things. There's a term that a teacher of mine, Terry Pichot, taught me that is small. If you pay attention to small things, it's like notice what works, because what we pay attention to grows. So we tend to be pretty problem focused in our overculture. As a people, as a species, we tend to be pretty problem focused. And so when we start to say, okay, wow, when do I feel slightly more connected to my husband? I'm not talking like fireworks and joy, right? I'm just like slightly more connected. What are the conditions that are happening that help me feel just that little bit more of connection? Do more of that. What helps me feel connected to myself as a woman and as an individual? Oh, actually, I'll speak for myself. Putting on jewelry. Silly, perhaps. Simple. Don't assume that simple acts lack profundity. It is often the simplest of acts that can make a huge difference. So notice those little things and nurture them like precious seedlings in a garden. Give them water, give them sunshine, watch them grow. Step by step by step.
Beautiful. Thank you, Britta. Thank you for that. I think we all just received in that response. So thank you so much. And I know everyone can now really see the depths of why Britta's had such a big impact on me and my journey. Her work is interwoven throughout the 40-week prenatal program on Interdimension TV called Initiating the Mother. Please go and learn more about Dr. Britta. Her website is brittabushnell.com. And you can find her on Instagram and social media at Britta Bushnell, PhD. Her book, Transformed by Birth, is available everywhere that books are sold. And I want to remind everybody that these conversations are offered freely by Interdimension TV. And as a result, we ask those who join us if there's an organization that they're feeling especially passionate about supporting. And for Dr. Britta, that was the Birth Sanctuary. The Birth Sanctuary is in Gainesville, Alabama, and is bringing safe and supported pregnancy care, labor, and birth services back to where they're needed most. And you can learn more about them at thebirthsanctuary.com. Dr. Britta, thank you so much for joining us. I am so grateful for your time and for receiving your wisdom. I learn from you every time I get to interact with you, whether that's in person or on social media, and I just cannot thank you enough.
Thank you so much, Lauren. It's been wonderful to be with you in this capacity or any capacity, and to connect with those who showed up live or who are watching the video. These are important conversations, and I'm really glad that you're offering them. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.